And in that talk, I went over just the first game that we did, the very first couple years. And today I'm going to talk about the early years of Lucasfilm Games, LucasArts, which was around 1982 to 90. I was actually there for another couple years after that, but I'm just going to focus on these 8 years. So let's start. First, well, where did it start? We have Lucasfilm is the company, and it started with a guy named George Lucas, who started making films in college in the 60s, and his first student film was THX 1138, which he then turned into a movie. And if you watch, you'll probably find those letters appear throughout all the Lucasfilm games somewhere. They're usually hidden in the games somewhere. Then he made American Graffiti, and then he made it big with Star Wars. And that's when everyone heard of him. And that was in 1977. 3 years later, he came back with The Empire Strikes Back. And that came out in 1980. And around that time, George was able to make the special effects of Empire Strikes Back more, much better than they were in Star Wars, but they were far below what he really wanted to do. He realized there was a limit to how many physical models of ships and TIE fighters and X-Wings you could actually have flying around at the same time, because each time they did it, they'd have to do another pass of a computer with motion-based, motion-controlled platform, moving the models and the camera around. And so he thought maybe if you could do it with computers, everything would be a lot simpler. And so he did an experiment. Around that time, around 1980, he had a company called Information International do a test with a computer-generated X-Wing. And that's what it looked like. It looks really good. And it looks great on film, except that it took way too long to render this. I don't know what the figures are, but probably days rather than a few minutes or hours or something. So they decided that that wasn't going to be practical. The thinking in 1980 was that computers at that time were going to be just too slow and too expensive to do anything practical with them in the movies. Storage was too expensive, but that they're getting faster and cheaper exponentially. And so we can do it with computers eventually. So let's find the best computer graphics wizards and start a new division so we'll be ready when the technology is ready. So around the end of the 70s, maybe 79, he started putting together a group of computer graphics wizards and started the Lucasfilm computer division. And one of the guys he hired, was a guy named Lauren Carpenter. And Lauren was a wizard in the area of fractals. And first let me talk about what a fractal is. If you look at most smooth objects, as you zoom in closer, they just tend to flatten out. There's no more detail to see as you get closer. And all smooth shapes do this, but fractals don't. Fractals have infinite detail, and as you zoom in, you get more and more and more detail. It's infinite; it goes on forever. And there are in nature, clouds are fractals, shorelines. If you look at a shoreline on the map and get a zoom in close up of that, it's still jagged. If you get closer, it's still jagged, and pretty much infinitely. Mountain ranges. There are formula that lets you simulate some of these shapes and some that don't exist. But what Lauren did in 1980 was he heard that George Lucas put together this new group, and he decided he wanted to work there. At the time, he was working for Boeing Aircraft, a maker of Boeing airplanes up in Seattle. And he realized that just sending a resume saying, hey, I want to work with you guys, wasn't going to do it. So he spent 4 months taking his algorithms to do fractals and turn them into a 2-minute movie where you can actually fly through this landscape as if you were in an airplane. This is the first time that was ever done. He finished it just in time for SIGGRAPH, which is the annual large computer graphics conference held in the States. And the two founders of the computer division, Ed Catmull and Alvy Ray Smith, happened to be sitting in the front row. After it was over, everyone stood on their feet, applauded. The crowd went wild, and Ed and Alvy offered Lauren a job right on the spot. So he got to work there. And they put this to use in the Genesis effect on the Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan in 1982, where you have a fly-through on a planet's surface as it's being terraformed, as it's being turned into an Earth-like planet. And you can see these mountain ranges coming up in front of you and growing and worked really well, except there was one point where, unfortunately, the mountain range rose right in front of the camera, so they had to cut a slit in the camera, in the mountain range, so the camera could fly right through it. So, meanwhile, I should say Lucasfilm was based in Marin County, which is just north of San Francisco. Atari, which everyone here has probably heard of, was based in Silicon Valley or Sunnyvale area, which is south of San Francisco. They had this great computer system called the Atari 2600. I think it cost a couple $100, and cartridges were like, what, 2K, 8K? They were pretty tiny. But there are millions of them out there on the market, so it was the big platform. Atari and Lucasfilm got together. Atari wanted some of Lucasfilm's star appeal, I guess, and offered a deal. So the Lucasfilm Games Group was born. Spring of 1982, Atari paid Lucasfilm $1 million to launch this new group. The new group would create games for the Atari game systems. Atari would get the first right of refusal for any game. It means that any game that we made, Atari would get offered it first. If they didn't want to do it, then it would go to some other publisher. And that the new group would be part of the Lucasfilm Computer Division. And elsewhere in Marin, meanwhile again, I had just finished work on a book on computer animation, which coincidentally focused on the Atari computer. And in my research, I actually interviewed some of the people from the Lucasfilm Computer Division and got a bunch of their photos of the high-end work they were doing, including like a couple of the ones I showed you, into the book. So I already was a little tapped in there. And I heard that this new games group was about to be started. So I quick called them up and got an interview, and they had just hired the guy to be the head of the group, named Peter Langston. And this is in the early summer of 1982. And a couple months later, after constantly calling Peter every 2 weeks, and he'd say, "Oh, no, in 2 weeks," finally I got the job. So I was the second one. In the book, this is some of the high-level computer graphics we did. I think the backgrounds were scrolling, things like, it was showing off the hardware capabilities of the Atari and showing you how to do things like that. This was inspired by Star Wars. It was a trench using color register animation, so it felt like you were moving down the trench. So this is the original group. I'd say 6 months after we started, this is the team. Charlie Kellner, who was one of the original Apple computer employees. Dave Levine, who